Hi folks! When I talk about GXP, good something practices, what does that make you think of? In today's episode, our guest Marina Daineko shares with us her expansive experiences in the best practices when it comes to following medical device cybersecurity. She has a rich background in multiple disciplines of medical devices, and today she's going to guide us through the essential practices that ensure the security of medical devices throughout their entire development lifecycle. Here goes. Marina, can you introduce yourself? How did you come to the medical device field?
Yeah, indeed. Hello, everyone. My name is Marina Daineko, and I am a big fan of medical device. Actually, I have started as R&D engineer because I really like this mixture of scientific side as well as some practical applications. That's why I became so excited about medical devices and actually started my career in this industry. So then I progressed into regulatory affairs and also really enjoy doing biological evaluation. And right now I'm compliance manager who ensures that medical devices, whether it's like hardware, firmware, software, or all together, are compliant with international regulations and controls. So I'm very excited to be here and thank you very much for the invitation.
Wonderful. I mean, it's wonderful to have you. I mean, you have a lot of expertise. It's nice to bring some people that have a lot of experience in this domain and more of a general view. So one topic that I'd like to focus on with you is the idea of good practices,
Mm-hmm.
GXP.
Yep.
Can you tell us a bit more what it is and how it's used today for quality and perhaps a bit of cybersecurity?
Yeah, absolutely. As I already said, I am big enthusiast in medical devices, and I do believe the better we know medical device from different perspectives, the better we can work actually here. So the main
Hmm.
idea of medical device is to be safe and effective. And when we are talking about GXP actually means good something practice. It can be, for instance, good documentation practice, good manufacturing practice, clinical laboratory, and many, many other different, very different practices. Okay. And what does it mean
Hmm.
actually? This GXP means different controls that shall be implemented into processes, different processes like development or manufacturing, some other like documentation to ensure that this process is repeatable and we have
Hmm.
in the end what we planned in the beginning. What does it mean? Just imagine, for instance, company who cooks cookies and we need to have the same recipe to be able to produce the same cookies each time, right? Because if you want, I don't know, coconut cookies, so we have to have this recipe with coconut and so on and so forth. Also, we need to have our oven prepared so it works at special degree, at special temperature, and some other things. So when we have this equipment prepared, when we have our recipe, we can produce our cookies. So it's, for instance, one of the example of GXP, like good manufacturing practice and maybe good clinical practice if we would like to check whether these cookies are okay or not okay for our colleagues. And if talking about security and especially about cybersecurity, it's also about controls that we have to implement
Hmm.
to our medical device. Okay, let me start maybe from the very beginning. We can consider
Hmm.
pacemaker. Pacemaker can collect some information about the heart and share this information, move this information to the cloud, and then from the cloud, for instance, to caregivers, to hospital, to the patient, to siblings, so on and so forth. It's one example. Another example, we can consider GXP application, for instance, application that is used to store clinical data or archive clinical data, or for instance, to store and maintain healthcare records. Just an example. And we have to apply these principles for security and cybersecurity. Why? Because right now we have even more connection. And right now, I really like this. There is Internet of Medical Things, IoMT, when different units are interconnected with each other. It means we have even more influence, even more scope. If something is broken or there is the threat, so it can affect whole system. And especially, yeah, surely we have AI and machine learning. So altogether,
Hmm.
it gives us even more threat, I would say. and
Yeah,
impact on
everything's
our lives.
interdependent.
Yes,
Mhm.
exactly, on our lives. That is why it's so important to introduce these controls into medical devices as well as GXP applications.
Yeah, and if I may also, the duplication of these devices is also making it that we have more potential ways that vulnerabilities will be created, or if one thing starts bugging, how resilient are the others? So it's very important that we have set practices to make sure that
Yeah,
that's no such thing happens. Do you
absolutely.
have examples of
Uh-huh.
what's a GXP standard? Is it, for instance, ISO 14971? Is it what
Uh,
are the
no,
Mhm.
ISO 14971 is actually about risk management principles, and they have even more focus on safety of medical devices. And if we're talking about security, so there is a bit different, distinct of security risk assessment or cybersecurity risk assessment, and it's different from safety risk assessment according to ISO
Mhm.
14971. However, they have very similar approaches how it can be applied. But if we are talking about GXP, for instance, as controls, so it came to medical device industry from pharma. So in the very beginning, it was applied just for pharma. And when
Okay.
we are talking about GXP, for instance, electronic signatures, okay, they are regulated according to CFR Part 11. If you're talking about the FDA, and if we are talking about Europe, they are regulated in Annex 11, if I'm not mistaken here. And for instance, different, I don't know, logging, audit trails. So they are also regulated according to CFR Part 11 by the FDA, and we have to comply with the specific requirements that are mentioned in these regulations. So also the best practices that are current state of the art in the industry, for instance, about the passwords. So passwords shall be changed each, for instance, 6 months. It shall contain like 3 capital letters with some values, all the things. So they are, I would say, best practices right now that are applicable, and we can introduce them as well into our development on the very beginning stage, because it's very important to have, if you're talking about device, application, whatsoever, secure by design. It's called secure by design, to implement the
Mhm.
security control in the very beginning stage. So we don't need to rebuild whole system when it's already almost in production.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it's very good practice. Perhaps we can start thinking about how to apply these GXP standards. And first and foremost, what about in the first stage where you start doing the design piece? What are some GXP that one should have when they start out with designing their medical device?
Yes, indeed. Actually, if you're talking about software, we have
Mhm.
some guys some time ago sit down together and decided that, okay, we have very different ways how this software can be developed, but we need to do it in structured and more aligned, streamlined way. So now we have software development lifecycle. It's described in the ISO 62304. And when developing software, we have very different stages, right? So we have to plan it, and we have to design and build. And from the very beginning, we need to understand what is the intended use of our software. So what is intended to do? Because I really like saying that in Bible, everything starts with the word, and in the medical device industry, everything starts with the intended use. So when we understand what exactly our software shall do, we can, and it's about intended use. So to whom this software, who are our users, what is use environment, where it's going to be used, how, and all these questions, we can understand possible risks associated with this software. Because as I've already said, safety risk assessment according to ISO 14971 is a bit different from cybersecurity risk, okay?
Mhm.
Mm, why? Because they consider, first of all, different aspects. Secondly, for instance, safety risk assessment may not consider reputational as well as financial loss. But security and cybersecurity risk can consider this aspect as well, and it's very important. So I would say that identifying these risks as well as identifying their requirements, for instance, there might be some requirements to our specific software, like business requirements, as well as regulatory requirements that we can also take from different regulations, standards, so on and so forth. Okay. And already here, we could actually apply good documentation practice because we have to follow a core principle and have everything documented with version history, with tracking changes and all these things. So when we have these requirements, we can actually look into architecture. And I would say that's a core phase or step even, because when I said secure by design, I mean that software architecture shall be aware about the requirements, about the intended use, and build some security principles into the architecture. Like, for instance, about authorization, maybe access management. I'm not a very technical person. I'm more about compliance. So to ensure that all possible current security best practices as well as requirements are implemented already on this stage. And when we have something built, usually we check its vulnerability scans is very important for security and cybersecurity. We are checking whether there are any vulnerabilities here, any threats there. So also we need to go to review our architecture, our code, our design with someone independent who was not involved in the development. So they can also look into the architecture and ask some additional questions like, okay, guys, do you have secure connection between input and output? If we have data in transit or data at rest, meaning like stored data, there might be some additional things that we have to be consider, like whether this data is secured, how is it secured, what certificate shall be used. All these aspects can be considered already on this very early stage.
That makes sense. I think what you're saying is right. You have to focus on ultimately who are the users going to be,
Yep.
what specific context are they going to be used in, who's the
Yep.
population, because obviously if it's trained professionals, it won't be the same as users who are not necessarily aware of certain things.
Absolutely.
The question that I have is, there's medical devices evolving, as you
Mhm.
said, you were talking about AI, ML, things like this. And cybersecurity is also very much evolving. I think it's perhaps one of the fastest domains
Yes.
in medical devices. So good practices obviously will evolve, right?
Yes, that's true.
From one year to the next. And the question that I have is, as a regulation professional and work on medical devices, how do you make sure that your processes are fixed enough to be repeatable and yet not too fixed so that you can adapt to the newest changes within the market?
Oh, so cool question and so challenging question, because it's always like a big question mark how to develop software in agile model and not just fall into waterfall, especially about +3 medical devices. We need to update all this documentation. We need to get approvals almost from everyone for this documentation. So first of all, it's about, I would say, quality management system that is applicable in the company. It's really important that this quality management system is mature. It's really important to have a look into standard operating procedures, work instructions, and propose improvements where possible. And also, what's very important is to have a look into regulations as well as best practices. Because look, when we have regulations and standards, they're updated not too often, quite often, but not too often, to be honest. And by the way, recently FDA published quite a lot of documentation around cybersecurity, but best practices are changing quite often. And that's why it's important to read professional literature, meet people, talk to people, especially during, webinars, conferences, whatsoever, and be aware of what's going on in the industry. For instance, I'm compliance. I'm not technical person, but I really love talking to my colleagues, like software architectures, also testing team, IT security team, and someone else to know more about like what's going on in the world. Yeah, that's really challenging and cool question. I would say from security and cybersecurity, I'm quite traditional. I would say that's never enough. We have to find the balance somehow from one side to ensure that our medical device is safe and effective, because it's a core function of the medical device to be safe and to be effective. But from other side, not to be too hard, too difficult, but push it and have this medical device life, because medical devices are changing lives, like reduce the pain and so on and so forth. So we have to find this balance, and it's not too easy. It's working with people. It's about communication with people and surely awareness.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. You always have to be aware, keep up with the strategy. But medical devices in general is such a wide field.
Yep.
There's a lot of good practices and best practices around the industry. How can a medical device manufacturer today, if they're looking to keep up with cybersecurity and keep up with other good practices and keep up with other good practices, what are some tools, what's out there for them to be able to manage all around all the good practices and make their processes evolve throughout time?
Again, very nice question, and I can't answer straightforward because it depends.
Mhm.
So first of all, we
Yeah.
need to understand what good practices can be applied to our application or to our medical device. And it's, again, we have to have a look into the intended use. And according to the definition, as per ISO 14971, it's about users, user environment, and all these things. So we have to consider and we have to understand what good practices can be applicable there. Also, we have to follow software development life cycle, because usually within the company, we have the framework that we have to follow. Okay, there are mandatory requirements that we can just go through. For instance, we have, if talking about cybersecurity, it's about any device that can have access to internet. It may not access to the internet, but it can have this access to the internet, right? So it means there are specific controls that shall be applicable there. And what are these controls? Maybe some antivirus and some others, I would
Mhm.
say it's working together with team, because it's not like one person exercise to understand what are the risks,
Yeah, for
but
sure.
working with the team. I would say that if talking about good practices and security and cybersecurity, two things are very important here, and we maybe have to focus on them. First of all, it's risk assessment to understand what are the risks. And from this perspective, we would understand what shall be applied there and how to mitigate this risk. And secondly, it's about testing, actually to check how it works. So like installation qualification, operational qualification, performance qualification, as well as vulnerability checks, introduce vulnerability checks. We can have them to monitor our system all the time. And surely if we have some patch or developing new features, so we need to double check whether there are any additional vulnerabilities, whether there are any additional risks related to security or cybersecurity there. So more or less, I believe I answered your question.
Oh, absolutely. And you're right. It's a team job in the end. You have different kind of people within the
Yes.
team or outsource people that can advise you on
Yep.
the next step you should take. And I think what you're pointing out is excellent because there's a common thing in software development lifecycle,
Yep.
whether it's at the beginning, at the very design phase, or at the end when the product is on the market or being pulled out of the market,
Mm-hmm.
is that if you do things properly that are not necessarily cybersecurity, like building strong software, not
Yep.
even talking about security specifically, everything else will fall into pieces. When you talk about, for instance, usability, if the software is good, it's going to be much more usable.
Yep.
Fault tolerance, if it's more tolerant to faults, to errors, it's going to be more secure as well.
Yep.
So there's many big benefits that we can get by doing things properly, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, and also like when our system is available on production, so we can, not we can, but we have to do post-market surveillance. And there is actually the guidance related to post-market surveillance for security and cybersecurity. So we have to collect this data and analyze this data and maybe take some measures if it's required. Again, according to what we have described into our risk management process. So what are the events? What are the threats? What is the impact? So everything shall be, I do believe everyone has pretty a lot of information. We just need to structure it, streamline it, and take actions. So that's really important. Absolutely, the system is a bigger milestone there.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's true as well. I'd like to go back to a topic we talked about: AI, machine learning,
Mhm.
and more regulation that's making AI and medical devices change. What are some regulations? What are some texts that people can look up to who are developing machine learning AI? I mean, I'm not sure why I'm saying this. It's the machine learning is part of AI,
Yeah.
but why are AI medical devices more? What are some documentations that people can look into to understand a bit more specifically about this AI piece regarding security and otherwise? What's it going to look like in the future?
Yeah, that's great question. Thank you. So I do remember the time when our medical devices can be certified only if they can be validated, but it was very challenging because usually we need, not we, but the system needs more and more information to be able to learn something. So we are talking about machine learning, right? To improve the predication, to improve artificial intelligence, to get some better results. Right now, I can see that, for instance, FDA approves more and more medical devices with AI, with machine learning. And actually, the FDA has a competency center available on their website where there is some additional information as well as guidances related to AI and machine learning. And it's actually a very big topic right now. And there is quite a lot of different best practices around AI. And so if talking about security and AI and machine learning, I would say that's emerging technology. And certification bodies are still learning how to assess it and how to work with it. So I'm expecting even more regulations and hopefully all possible, fingers crossed, all these regulations are aligned between each other. So we don't need to follow like different regulations depending on whether we would like to certify our medical device for the States or here, for instance, in Europe.
Yeah, and this is the role that GDMB, well, the Global Medical Device Group
Yes, yes, yes. They have task
is working
force.
on.
They have task force right now and working pretty intensively. That's why we have so many published regulations and guidances and best practices how to work with it. Absolutely, yes.
Mhm. I think AI also brings a new challenge in in the sense that if you prompt, especially with generative AI,
Mhm.
which is one slim part of AI, but there's a component of randomness to a lot of AI models, and that can be a big blocker against good practices. We also mean repeatability. That's what we
Yes,
love in medical
absolutely.
devices. So when we're dealing with AI and these cases where there's a piece of randomness, how can we at least give an idea or at least mitigate the risk of unpredictable results?
Teach better. Machine learning piece. I would say machine learning piece is very important. And I also know
Mhm.
that there are challenges. For instance, if you're talking about skin cancer and with picture, like with making a picture and uploading it to the device, so device can analyze their picture and understand or predict the skin cancer, for instance. But I do remember it was very quite big challenge, for instance, for skin color. Different people have different skin colors, and we have to consider really who intended population, who are our users, who are users for this
Mhm.
specific medical device or the application, for instance, right? And when we consider different these aspects, and for machine learning, for instance, to be able to upload and teach our application on different cases. So definitely it can improve their output, their result. Also, it's like one challenge, right? Another challenge is that, for instance, if we upload some confidential data or sensitive data to AI, right? So we have to consider also aspects related to security and cybersecurity. So there is no data breach, or implement some additional controls related to cybersecurity to prevent this thing. So I would say that's actually a complex question, and it relates not only to predictable output, because again, I'm not a technical person, I'm just compliance. I can say
Mhm.
from compliance
Yeah, yeah.
perspective, right? But I would say that we have to consider from very different aspects and be part of cross-functional team to understand what else can pop up here.
hmm Yeah, it's all about working in a team and understanding
Yes. Yes.
what are the risks, what are the, and I think
Yes.
you're right when you say teach it properly, right? We have to think about who the users are. And
Exactly.
it's
Yes.
true. It's not just about the quantity of data; it's also about the quality
Absolutely.
of what you put in. How do you make sure you have outlier detection or
Yeah.
anomalies detection? Things that are very important to machine learning. So
Yeah. Very.
if you had to give one tip for managers and engineers on how to improve their best practices positions regarding compliance,
Mhm.
what would it be?
Maybe several tips. Our first one
Mhm,
is know what is SDLC and stick to it, because
mhm,
it's really cool frameworks that can help to consider different aspects and go quite smoothly through different phases. And don't forget about specific activities like, for instance, code review or vulnerability scanning or approval of some documentation.
mhm.
Another tip would be I'm really happy to see that right now the community is even more open than ever. I mean, there are quite a lot of free information available on LinkedIn or just on the FDA Competency Center or IMDRF. So there are different regulations, best practices. So just have a look, talk to people, don't be shy, share your expertise. Also, people, as I already said, I'm very happy they are already sharing their expertise. Just altogether, it can help to understand current state of the art, where we are and what are tendencies. So yeah, I do believe this sticking to these two tips would help significantly improve implementation of good practices into software development and stay not only compliant, but produce safe and effective medical device.
Yeah, and that stays effective and relevant
Yeah,
for the future to come.
yeah.
Marina, can if people want to know more about you, where should they go?
Just feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn. I like this network and I like talking to people, especially about medical devices. So please don't be shy. If you're shy, just kind of note me and I will be there. Yes, maybe I can share the link to my LinkedIn with you so
Yeah,
you can also provide
absolutely.
it. Yeah, cool.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Marina, for coming on, and yeah, beautiful rest of your day.
Oh, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much and happy Friday. First Friday, actually, today. This year.
Thank you, Marina.
Thank you.
All right, folks, did you enjoy this episode? Well, I certainly did, and here are my top 3 learnings for this one. Number 1, GXP standards ensure repeatable, safe processes in medical devices. They began in pharma, but are now a vital part of medical device cybersecurity and medical devices as a whole. Number 2, security must be secure by design, from the start of the development, including proper risk assessments that consider both safety and security impact. And lastly, number 3, AI, and specifically machine learning, are bringing in new challenges because medical devices require special attention to maintain repeatability and predictability, particularly through proper data training, selection, and consideration of the intended user population. Very important. Folks, if you'd like to learn more and have active tips for this within your company, I would very much recommend signing up for the newsletter called Cyber Doctor Notes. You can find it at cyberdoctornotes.com, which is where I send you one actionable tip every Thursday so that you can apply this knowledge to your organization. Folks, it's been me, Matthew Poteau, Cyber Doctor, and I'll see you next week.